Welcome to Don't Give Up on Testicular Cancer, a podcast where testicular cancer survivors, caregivers, and others who have navigated the cancer journey share their stories. The podcast comes to you from the Max Mallory Foundation, a nonprofit family foundation focused on educating about testicular cancer in honor and in memory of Max Mallory, who died in 2016 at the young age of 22 from testicular cancer. Had he survived, Max wanted to help young adults with cancer. This podcast helps meet that goal. Here now is your host, Joyce Lofstrom, Max's mom and a young adult cancer survivor.
Mason survived testicular cancer 3 times, with his first diagnosis in 2003, just 2 weeks before his wedding. He made the wedding as planned and became a vocal advocate for men's health and men taking responsibility for their health. The cancer returned in 2018 with a nodule in his right lung, and again in 2019 in the same lung. Mason will share the details of these diagnoses, which were testicular cancer. He continues to give back to the cancer community as a testicular cancer survivor and now 7 years cancer-free. So, Mason, thanks so much for being with me.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
So let's just start. Tell us your story, your testicular cancer story.
Yeah, I'm going to date myself a little bit here, but I'm going to take you all the way back to December of 2002. At the time, I was 28 years old, about to turn 29, in great shape, busy with my career. And as most 28-year-old guys think, I thought I was indestructible. The main news there was I also happened to be just a little over a month away from getting married to my beautiful wife, Carmen. So with work, holidays, and planning for a wedding, I had a lot going on, needless to say. As the month went on, I started to feel less than 100%. I was tired. My workouts weren't going all that great. Something definitely felt off. And I just wrote it off to being stressed with everything that was going on. There was a lot going on, so I figured it was nothing to worry about. Then one day when I was showering, I felt something strange. I actually found a lump about the size of a BB on my left testicle. Again, I figured it was nothing. Maybe it had always been there. I didn't know honestly what it was. Moving on, as the month went on, I started to feel worse and worse. And I also started to notice that the lump was growing. So finally on January 7th of '03, I visited my primary care physician, really just hoping to find out, oh, it's nothing to worry about. Go on with all your plans, etc. That's where the whirlwind really began. He immediately sent me off for an ultrasound. That was closely followed by a trip to a urologist. And within a matter of days, I was being told I had testicular cancer. And interestingly enough, on January 14th, I had surgery to remove my left testicle. And January 18th, I got married.
Oh, Mason.
So, definitely a whirlwind, of course. After the wedding and an abbreviated honeymoon, I immediately came back and began 3 rounds of the BEP protocol that I'm sure you and all of your listeners and viewers are familiar with. When all of this happened to me, I knew nothing about testicular cancer. I did not know the importance of men taking ownership of their health, doing regular self-examinations, etc. So it became a fast track for me to learn with what I was dealing with. Good news is that I went through the 3 rounds of BEP. Everything turned out great. Went on surveillance for 5 years with all of the regular CT scans and blood work, and all was good. So after year 5, I was told I was cancer-free at that point and allowed to move on with my life.
Well, I know once you got through the orchiectomy and the BEP, you really started to give back. I wanted to talk about that, just how you've helped, since your diagnosis, help other men understand what to do if they feel a lump or something unusual. Would you talk about that?
Yeah, it immediately became a mission of mine to advocate for awareness of not only testicular cancer, but of men needing to take ownership of their health in general. It's not something that we're taught, especially my generation. I'm Gen X. We were taught as young men that it was almost a badge of honor to not take care of yourself. You know, if you fell down and you heard something, rub some dirt on it, right? You were almost shunned from going to the doctor. So I wanted to change that narrative. In the years that followed, I would speak at schools, colleges, other organizations that focused on young people. And I would share my story as a backdrop for not only raising awareness for testicular cancer, but that broader story of the need for men to take ownership of their health.
Well, and I think that's so important because a lot of men don't, or they, like you said, I'd never heard of testicular cancer with Max, my son, and a lot of men never had. So I think that's really wonderful that you could do that. Now we're going to go on to the next phase of this, but I really want to let our listeners know that your cancer came back after 15 years, and that's very unusual. It also returned to your lungs. So can you tell us that saga, that part of your story, and what you did?
Yeah, that's where the journey really got interesting. So you mentioned the 15-year gap there, which is something that's not typical at all. February 2018, I was here in the Orlando area attending a local business networking event, something that I did common for my profession. And about midway through that luncheon, I was hit with a really sharp, almost excruciating pain in my lower chest, upper abdomen, to the point where it had me doubled over in pain in the luncheon. I knew this wasn't my typical ache and pain. I knew it wasn't, a pulled muscle, something like that. So I had to think back to myself and say, okay, Mason, what have you been talking about for the last 15 years in these speaking engagements that you've been doing and all of your advocacy work? You need to take ownership of this situation because you know something's not right. I was about 45 minutes away from home. So I kind of had a judgment call to make at that point. And so I did something that I've never done in my life, got on my trusty iPhone and found the nearest emergency room.
Mm, wow.
Took myself to an emergency room affiliated with a large health system here in the Orlando area, and they tested me for everything. I mean, was it a gallbladder issue? Was I having a cardiac issue? Urinalysis, X-ray, etc. Nothing was showing up,
Mm,
abnormal from that perspective. Luckily, the ER doctor, though, made a call that probably saved my life. He came to me and said, Mason, look, we know you have a history of testicular cancer. It's been 15 years. So the likelihood that this is a recurrence of that is really minimal. But let's go ahead and do a CT scan of chest, abdomen, and pelvis and just see if there's anything there. So they did that. And when they did the CT scan, they discovered a 1.6 centimeter nodule on my right lung. So from there, they said, okay, Mason, we need to keep you overnight. We want to biopsy this and see what we have going on here. And so they did just that. They kept me overnight. The next morning, they biopsied it. They sent me on my way and said, okay, we'll be back in touch with you with what this is. Hopefully it's nothing. The diagnosis that they came back with was that it was squamous cell carcinoma of the lung. And which was very confusing because if you know anything about that disease, it's almost always associated with lifestyle, smoking, things like that. I've
right.
never smoked a day in my life. And so I was at age 44 at that point, faced with the situation of, okay, I'm now 44 and I've now had two individual different types of cancers. What luck, right?
Yeah, yeah, I know.
Thank goodness that the doctor did do that, because if it had been squamous cell carcinoma, which we'll talk more about in just a second, that is something that typically remains symptomless until it's too late. And so, for whatever reason, I had that pain, which we still don't know if it was related to what I was dealing with or not, got me to that ER, and it got me to that doctor who had the foresight to do a CT scan. The great news is that we caught it early. The bad news is they said, okay, Mr. Moore, there's no adjuvant care that you're going to have to do, no chemo, no radiation, but we are going to have to remove the middle lobe of your right lung.
Oh, wow.
So we did a robotic surgery where they removed the entire middle lobe of my right lung. And from there, I went on surveillance.
Wow. So you did that. I just am kind of shocked because there's more to the story that all this
Yeah.
happened and that it could come back as squamous cell lung cancer. And tell us what it really was and what happened next.
Yeah. And I will say there at that point, there were two mistakes made, one by me and one by the health system. At that point, because I was ingrained in this health system and thought I was dealing with a different type of cancer, I did not involve my original oncologist from my first cancer in '03. Um, the health system's mistake was they thought we were dealing with a separate cancer, so they never ran my tumor markers.
Oh,
So,
okay.
so we thought at that point this was a completely different cancer. They did not run my beta HCG or alpha theta protein, and so I went on a regular surveillance of every 4 months, where I went in for CT scan and chest X-ray. Notice no blood work or tumor markers checked. And so I was actually in my second set of surveillance about 8 months later. We're at this point, December of 2018. And unfortunately, we discovered that the cancer was back. It was actually near the surgery line. So right on the line of my middle lobe and upper lobe. Interestingly enough, though, this nodule was much larger. And so that really confused everyone, because if it were squamous cell carcinoma, that's typically a slow growing cancer. This one grew over the course of 8 months to a size almost 4 times as large as the original one. So we're at that point trying to figure out what to do. They biopsied this nodule again. They tested it, and then they also sent it off to 3 leading cancer research systems across the country. And this time they all came back undeniably that this was actually a germ cell tumor. This was a recurrence of my original cancer 15 years later.
Yeah.
And so at that point, when we got the biopsy results back, we at that point ran my tumor markers. And of course, my beta HCG was elevated. It was actually 1700.
Okay. Wow. Yeah.
So at that point, I got my original oncologist involved again because, we had been so successful in treating my first TC recurrence, or my first case of TC, I should say. At that point, I was told I was stage 4 because I was now in my second recurrence, and I would have, a 40 to 50% chance of surviving 5 years. So at that point, I was faced with my mortality. The treatment from there began in February of 2019. I actually ended up doing 3 cycles of chemotherapy. I was originally prescribed 4. I'll tell a little bit more about that story in just a second. But my local oncologist here in the Orlando area started things off with a cycle of VIP chemo regimen. And then as he continued to do research and look to try to find cases that were similar to mine, which was very difficult to do, he made the decision then to send me to a research system here in Florida. It's Florida's only NCI certified system, and went there for inpatient chemo and started the TIP regimen.
Okay.
So I was there inpatient. And the great news is that the TIP started working almost immediately. My tumor markers began to go down. The mass immediately began to shrink. Where things got interesting and where I had another take ownership of your health moment was after the 3rd cycle, my tumor markers were actually normal. They were almost non-existent, but the mass had stopped shrinking. And so there was simply a mass that was still showing on the CT scans. And at that point, the health system that I was at in Tampa, which is the system I was with, recommended that I come in for a 4th cycle of chemo, and that if the mass doesn't shrink after the 4th cycle, the recommendation was to remove what was left of my right lung.
Oh my.
And so that's where I was faced with my next ownership moment. I had been doing research all along through all of this journey of 20 plus years. And so I actually wanted to ask some questions. So I went back to that health system and I said, look, I've read instances where a mass will stop shrinking if it's all necrotic tissue. So basically scar tissue or dead tissue. I said, is there any possibility that's the case here? And they said that's always a possibility. So I then said, okay, well, if that's the case, if that's even possible, could we switch or toggle from doing a CT scan to doing a PET scan? Because it's my understanding that in a PET scan, if there's cancer present, it will light up, it will show as hot. And that would be a good indicator of what we have going on here. So at that point, they prescribed a PET scan, and the PET scan the mass came back cold. So from a PET scan perspective, it was not showing live cancer. Their recommendation was still to do the 4th cycle and see where we stood. So that's when I asked another question. I said, time out. I want to ask some additional questions about this with some other folks. So I went back to the surgeon who did my robotic lung surgery for the first recurrence. And I said, here's what we have going on. I said, robotically, can you get to this mass and pull it out with margins enough so that we could then biopsy this mass and get definitive word on what it was? And he said, absolutely.
Wow.
So at that point, I then forced 3 different health systems, my original oncologist, the inpatient system that I was doing my chemo with, and now this surgeon. And in some cases, they compete with one another. I had all 3 of these systems now forced to work together. And so we had the surgery in May of 2019, and they were immediately able to take the mass and have it biopsied. The surgeon system biopsied it. My local oncologist biopsied it. The system where I was doing chemo biopsied it. And then they sent it back to those 3 national systems that had done the biopsy earlier. All came back definitively as being necrotic or dead tissue.
Wow.
So at that point, I saved myself having to do another round of TIP, which, just trust me, it was debilitating. But more importantly, I saved what was left of my right lung. So now, rather than having no right lung, I have half of a right lung.
Wow. This story says a lot of things for all of us to think about. First, I want to say the NCI, National Cancer Institute, those organizations, I think there's about 29 or 30 across the country. So that's just something to know, that definition. But you were very educated and read about it. And like we said earlier, advocated for yourself. And I think we all have to be ready to do that because you knew and you saved yourself a lot of pain and suffering. The story is just so fascinating to me. Just why it happened to begin with, but then how you get all three organizations work together. So,
Yeah, I didn't see that I had any option. At that
right.
point, I had a family, a young daughter, and it sounds cliche, but no, I was literally fighting for my life.
Yeah, you
I wanted to be here for things for myself and for my daughter and for my wife. If I didn't make some tough decisions, if I didn't ask a lot of questions, that I might not be here today. You'll remember I was told I had a less than 50% chance of being here 5 years later. Well, I actually celebrated 7 years just 3 weeks ago. And so that's a win in of itself. And I tell people all the time when I talk with others who are dealing with this or something else is that don't ever worry about being a pest. Don't ever worry about being an advocate for yourself. Ask as many questions
yeah.
as you possibly need to, because as much as I've been treated by a phenomenal group of clinicians that have treated my disease, you still have to own the system, because at the end of the day, it's about you.
Oh, yep, that's true. That's exactly right. So tell us about your support system during all these different cancer surgeries, all of it. You had to have a good
Yeah,
one.
I was very fortunate to have a tremendous support system during all of my phases of my journey. Starts with my amazing wife, who I probably still owe a proper honeymoon at this point. Both of my parents were right by my side through all three journeys as well. I also had a strong network of friends and professional colleagues who supported me every step of the way. However, some people might not be as fortunate as me. They may not
Yeah.
have that strong of a network. And I think it's vital that all of the cancer community make these people aware of the many resources and support groups and systems that are available to them so that they can help navigate their battle the same way that I might. I was very fortunate. There are others who don't have that system. There are resources out there that they can help them. So it's a incumbent upon all of us to make sure they know about that.
Yeah, I agree. You're right. You're absolutely right. I know that you're an alum of the University of Central Florida and also a good friend of one of our previous podcast guests, Dr. Michael Rovito, who's also at UCF. Talk about just how you are working together with him on some of his wellness for men's health programs. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm very active with my alma mater, University of Central Florida. Dr. Revito and I were introduced more than a decade ago. I think it was actually during one of my speaking engagements at UCF. I think I spoke to one of his cohorts. We fast became colleagues and friends. The work that he's doing at UCF, as well as through his male wellness collective, are so vital, so important. So, to help starting the work that he's doing at the university, I actually started the Mason Moore Fund for Testicular Cancer Research and Awareness. That fund helps support the various programs that he and his team are doing every day. Some great work in raising awareness, developing the next group of clinicians that are going to help treat this disease, et cetera. And then I also have recently joined the board of directors for his male wellness collective as well too. So really excited about that. But I am fortunate enough to be in a position to do something like that, and I felt it incumbent upon myself to do so.
see, that's so wonderful. I think that you can do that and give back because I know he's started with your funds that whole testicular cancer program there. So thank you for doing that. I want to read a quote. I read this on your 2024 Instagram account, and I would like your thoughts about your perspective now. And so here's the quote. Milestones, especially those related to trauma, are very much a double-edged sword. They serve as motivation and should certainly be celebrated. On the flip side, their presence can make it more difficult to move on from the trauma and can leave you asking yourself, well, what's next? So tell us about that quote.
Yeah, it was something that I wrote as I was approaching that magical 5-year number that I was told I
Yeah.
might not make. I had a sense of melancholy around it. You would think, okay, you've reached this really important goal. You should be super excited about it. And we certainly did celebrate it. But there was also almost a level of depression around it at
Yeah.
the same time, because once you reach that milestone, there's always the next milestone. And so it makes it very hard for you to kind of move on. You'll never forget that you're a cancer survivor, nor should you. But there's a part of you emotionally that needs to be able to move past it, move past the worry that comes with it every day. At least that's what I think. And so from that perspective, it makes it hard to do that. The other thing is too, is when you reach that milestone and you've had that level of, let's say, success, what's next? What becomes next? And I found myself in a spot where you hit this number that you thought you might not. So what's next for you in life? What's next for you as a cancer survivor? What's next for you as a husband, a father, a son, all of those things? And that's really where the mental health side of being a cancer survivor comes into play. One thing I've said on many occasions is, again, I was treated by an amazing group of clinicians who treated me for cure of disease. But one thing that was not spoken to me very much at all during my 20 plus year journey as a cancer survivor has been the mental health side of this. And there's lots of research out there that shows the connection between mental and physical health. You find yourself as a cancer survivor at some point almost feeling isolated. And so I found myself not being equipped to know how to deal with that. And so that's why I said these milestones can be a double-edged sword, because it can actually put you in a very strange place.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So what is next for you in life right now with your work, your family, whatever you want to talk about?
What's dominating our lives right now is our daughter, Marley, who's 18 years old, is graduating from high school in a couple of weeks. Everyone goes through that who is a parent. Marley is especially special for us, as all kids are to their parents. But in our case, we weren't ever supposed to be able to have her. Of course, as part of the TC process, prior to my first go around with TC in 2003, we banked sperm because we wanted to start a family at some point. After I had recovered and we felt we were ready to start a family, we tried artificially to conceive and were unable to. And so after that, my wife Carmen and I, we came to grips with the idea that we will never be parents. And we were okay with that. We resolved ourselves to that. And then probably 6 months after we had that very tough discussion, we found out we were pregnant.
Oh,
and
wow.
we had this little miracle baby that was never supposed to happen. And she's very special to us for that reason, but she's graduating high school and she is actually going to be going to the old man's alma mater. She's going to be attending University of Central Florida and will be a part of the same college that Dr. Revito is part of. So we're very proud parents at this point. So that's dominating a lot of what we have going on right now.
Oh, that's a big deal. I know. Wow. That's great to hear all of it.
Yeah.
So congrats.
Thank you.
So my last question, Mason, is what song, when you hear it, do you have to sing along?
Lively Up Yourself by Bob Marley.
Okay. Oh, all right. Reggae.
My daughter's name is Marley. Funny joke. I'll tell people that she's named after Bob Marley. And they go, "Oh, her name's Marley." And I go, "No, it's Bob." And then they look at me strange. But no, her name is Marley. And Bob Marley has a big role in our lives. And so, yeah, Lively Up Yourself by Bob Marley.
Okay. Yeah. Yep. That's great music. It really is. Well, thanks for taking the time to share everything with me. And I really applaud what you're doing to give back, and glad you're here and made it through all of it. So I'd like you to come back maybe in a year and just let us know what you're doing with everything.
Absolutely. Anytime. I would love to.
All right. Well, thank you, Mason.
Thanks, Joyce.
Okay.
Thank you for watching this episode of Don't Give Up on Testicular Cancer. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to our program on your favorite podcast directory. You can also visit the Max Mallory Foundation at www.maxmalloryfoundation.com/podcast to listen to previous podcast episodes or donate to the foundation. Join us again next time for another episode of Don't Give Up on Testicular Cancer.